They told you it was a drink, a little fun at dinner, a way to loosen up at parties, a toast to love, to grief, to life. They sold it in bottles, shaped like celebration, and poured it into glasses raised high with laughter. But they never told you what it really was. They never told you it was a tool, not of freedom, but of forgetting. That behind the glossy advertisements and romantic aesthetics lies something far older, something sacred that was repurposed, diluted, and handed to you as entertainment. You were handed a weapon and told it was a gift. From the first time your eyes watched grown-ups raise their glasses, something inside you began to form a pattern. This, you thought, is how it's done. This is what it means to be mature, to be part of something, to live a little. And by the time you took your first sip, the spell had already been cast. The drink wasn't new. The idea of it was already rooted deep inside you, not by accident, but by design. But the truth, the one you were never shown, is that alcohol isn't just a liquid that changes your behavior. It's a substance that shifts your spirit ever so subtly away from alignment. Its effects don't stop with your liver, your speech, or your reflexes. It travels deeper, into the layers of you most people don't even know how to see, into the field of energy that surrounds your body, holds your frequency, protects your clarity. The part of you that resonates like a tuning fork with the unspoken world, that senses truth before words form. That's where it hits. That's where the real damage is done. You weren't born reaching for a drink. That craving isn't part of your nature. It was taught, layered into your life through moments, messages, and mirrors. You didn't just drink to feel good. You drank because somewhere along the way you learned that your natural state wasn't enough. That feeling deeply was dangerous. That vulnerability needed sedation. And the drink was the solution, an elegant, culturally endorsed solution for the stress, for the pain, for the joy too big to hold, for the silence you weren't taught to sit with. But alcohol wasn't always this casual. Long before it was mass-produced and advertised on billboards, it was revered and feared. It was the sacred tool of alchemists, priests, mystics, those who understood that it wasn't just a fluid, but a force. The word alcohol itself traces back to ancient Arabic roots, not originally a word for a drink, but for a black powder used around the eyes, and then even more deeply, for a process of extraction, a distillation of essence, the drawing out of spirit. Alchemists use the word to describe the soul pulled from matter, the spirit stripped from the body. So when we say we're drinking spirits, it's not just a poetic term, it's a remnant of a forgotten truth, a breadcrumb left in the language, a warning passed down through etymology. Because alcohol in its most potent form was once used in sacred rites, not as a party favor but as a catalyst for transformation. It was not sipped over casual chatter. It was invoked, respected, sometimes feared, because those who truly understood it knew. This substance doesn't just change your mood, it changes your vibration. What you vibrate, you attract. What you resonate with, you invite. And alcohol, more than almost anything else, bends that resonance. It lowers the frequency of the field around you. The field some call the aura, others call the biofield, the light body, or simply your energetic self. That field is your signal. It's how the universe knows who you are, and when that field is strong, it acts as a shield. Thoughts become clearer, emotions more honest, intuition louder. But when that field is weakened, when it's full of tiny tears from repeated intoxication, everything changes. Confusion seeps in. Strange moods stick to you. People's energies imprint on you in ways you can't shake. You might feel it as anxiety that wasn't yours, or a heaviness that came out of nowhere, or a strange, persistent sadness the morning after a night of fun. The world will call it a hangover, but deeper down, something else is happening. Your soul is trying to recover from an invasion, an intrusion not by people, but by frequencies, energetic parasites, stray impressions, or even thought forms that hook into your weakened field and feed on your disconnection. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're just porous. And alcohol made you that way. Ancient traditions from every corner of the world knew this. They knew that intoxication, especially repeated intoxication, creates holes in the energy body. It opens doorways, and not every door should be opened. Not every entity that steps through has kindness in its nature. Some are subtle, feeding only on your sadness or confusion. Others are more direct, embedding impulses, cravings, thoughts that feel like yours but aren't. These aren't fairy tales. They're observations encoded in the rituals and restrictions of those who saw further than we do now. They weren't afraid of alcohol itself. They were cautious of what it invited in. And still, here we are, surrounded by a culture that worships the drink, that ties it to celebration, to success, to romance. You raise a glass at weddings, after funerals, on birthdays, and bad days. You drink to connect. You drink to forget. You drink to feel like yourself. But each time something drifts a little further from alignment, the laughter might feel real, the intimacy might seem deep, but afterward, something's off. A feeling you can't quite name, a heaviness behind the eyes, a silence inside you that feels unfamiliar. That's your essence dimmed. The drink doesn't just make you louder, it makes you more open, and not in the way of honesty, in the way of vulnerability without discernment. You're more accessible, energetically exposed. And what comes in through that opening doesn't leave just because you sleep it off. It lingers in your thoughts, in your choices, in the habits you can't seem to break, the doubts you can't explain, the sense of being distant from your own center. These are the fingerprints of energetic interference. But nobody tells you this. Nobody warns you that alcohol doesn't just interfere with your liver enzymes, it interferes with your alignment. It dulls your inner voice, the one that whispers when something's off. It mutes the warning bells. It makes the unnatural feel normal and the abnormal feel safe. And the longer you stay in that altered frequency, the more lost you become. Not in a dramatic way, in a slow, quiet erosion of clarity. A drift you only notice once you're far enough from shore that the coastline disappears. You might feel this in the mornings, in the way your thoughts move slower, the way your body feels slightly disconnected from your decisions. You brush it off, you say you're tired, you say you need coffee. But the truth is, your system is trying to come back online. It's trying to rebuild what was fractured the night before, not just physically, energetically, spiritually. It's no coincidence that when people go on deep spiritual journeys, retreats, pilgrimages, inner work, they're asked to abstain, not because spirit is rigid, but because presence requires clarity. You can't climb the mountain if you're wearing fogged lenses. You can't hear your soul's voice if you've muted it with chemistry. And alcohol mutes it every time. Even when you feel empowered or expressive under the influence, that's not your truth. That's your inhibition falling away. But what's beneath inhibition isn't always authenticity. Sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's suppressed pain. And when you take off the filters without healing what's underneath, the result isn't freedom, it's chaos. You begin to mistake volume for depth, connection for merging, presence for noise. You lose track of where you end and others begin. And when the buzz fades, you're left unsure whether the experience you had was real or just chemical. You forget how to access joy without it. You begin to think that your best self only exists after a few drinks, that your courage lives in a glass, but that's the trap, the loop, the lie so many spend a lifetime chasing. And that's just the beginning. You start to feel like the version of you that dances in the dim light, who speaks without rehearsing, who smiles without permission. That version only appears when you drink. And so you drink again, not for the taste, not for the ritual, but for the fleeting reunion with a self you believe only lives in the haze. But that version isn't real. It's a distortion, a reflection seen through rippled water. And the more you chase it, the further away you drift from who you truly are. It's not that alcohol shows you your truth. It simply removes the barriers to expression, while also stripping away discernment. You're not more authentic under its influence. You're more exposed. You're reactive, not responsive. You say what you mean, maybe. But you also say what pain has been waiting to scream. And in that mixture of clarity and confusion, you mistake chaos for liberation. But what alcohol really does is interrupt the sacred rhythm of your own awareness. Your intuition, that whisper from within that guides you away from danger, toward alignment, toward growth, becomes quiet. Your energetic boundaries, which are meant to protect your sense of self, soften and dissolve. What should be a filter becomes a sponge. You soak up emotions that aren't yours. You confuse intensity for intimacy. And afterward, you wonder why you feel drained. That drain is real. It's not just in your head, it's in your field. A field that once hummed with coherence, that once magnetized clarity and repelled distortion. Now that field has been punctured by repeated numbing. And when you're open in the wrong way, you become available to things that take without asking. You may feel that in subtle ways, a vague sense of detachment, a rising insecurity, a growing struggle to center yourself. But those are not personality flaws, they are symptoms of fragmentation. Your energy doesn't just disappear, it disperses, it scatters across experiences that promised to uplift but left you hollow. And those fragments of you left behind in blurry nights and half-remembered conversations don't come back easily. They need to be called home, not by guilt, not by shame, but by presence. It's because every time you reach for a drink, whether it's to celebrate or to silence something, you send a signal, not just to your nervous system, but to the subtle structures of your being. You're telling your body, this moment isn't safe to feel. This feeling is too much. This truth, too loud. And so your body obeys. It learns to dissociate, to bypass, to turn the volume down on anything that feels sharp, even if that sharpness was a signpost, even if that pain was a message. And when that becomes your norm, when avoidance becomes your main strategy, your entire life begins to reshape itself around suppression. You make choices that avoid rather than engage. You build relationships where nothing runs too deep. You chase experiences that offer stimulation but not connection. And eventually, you forget what it feels like to be fully present in your own skin. Not all at once, but gradually. You lose the ability to sit with silence without needing to fill it. You struggle to access peace unless it's manufactured. The real you, the one who used to feel deeply, move intuitively, speak with clarity, becomes a memory. You start mistaking the hollowed out version for your core self, but deep down, you know something is missing, something vital. It's not just your past self you're missing, it's your alignment. That sacred thread that connects you to your center, to your source, to whatever you call the divine. Alcohol frays that thread, not because it's evil, not because it's cursed, but because its vibration is dense, heavy, grounding in the worst way. It pulls your consciousness toward the lower aspects of your nature, desire, avoidance, pleasure, distraction, and away from your higher faculties. discernment, compassion, insight, vision. You don't need a doctrine to know this. Your body tells you, your spirit shows you. The first few sips may feel like lightness, but what comes after is always weight, energetic fog, emotional instability, psychic vulnerability. And the more you normalize that pattern, the more you forget what clarity feels like. But clarity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, especially in a world designed to distract you. You live in a reality built on noise, on advertisements, opinions, agendas, manipulations. You're bombarded with signals every second, and the only way to navigate that with sovereignty is through presence, through inner stillness, through a clear signal. Alcohol interferes with that signal. It scrambles your internal compass. It makes your yes less certain, your no more hesitant. You second-guess what was once instinct. You say yes when your body says no. You stay when your spirit is screaming to leave. You mistake attraction for alignment. You confuse relief for healing. And by the time the buzz fades, you're left sorting through a fog of misplaced energy. That's the subtle devastation. Not the wild nights or loud regrets. It's the slow erosion of inner trust. The way alcohol teaches you not to listen to yourself. The way it rewards disconnection with pleasure. It convinces you that numbing is normal, that performance is connection, that ease must come from outside you. But your ease was never supposed to come from a bottle. It was meant to arise naturally, from the knowing that you are enough as you are, that your presence is powerful, that your rawness is not a liability, it's your link to the divine. But alcohol interrupts that link. It makes you believe that your best moments come from being altered. And when that belief roots itself deeply enough, you stop seeking joy in your unfiltered self. You don't just consume alcohol. You begin to be consumed by it, not in dramatic addiction necessarily, but in subtle dependency. You start building your identity around the version of you that drinks. The social you, the romantic you, the fun you, and the quiet, sober you starts to feel like a shadow. But the truth is, that quiet self is your real power. That's where the magic lives, the insight, the creativity, the deep capacity to connect, not just with others, but with yourself. That self is what alcohol distracts you from. Not because it's malicious, but because it's fast, easy, immediate. It gives you what presence offers, but without the practice. The trouble is that shortcut has consequences. You don't get to keep what you didn't earn. The confidence wears off. The joy turns hollow. The insights evaporate. And what you're left with isn't just a hangover. It's a void. A sense that something meaningful passed through you but left nothing behind. So you chase it again. Another drink, another night, another chance to feel connected, but each time you're drawing further away from the source of that connection, because real connection can't be bought, it can't be poured, it can't be chemically simulated, it has to be lived. And living, in its most authentic form, requires sobriety, not in the narrow moral sense, but in the energetic one. To be sober is to be clear, awake, present, able to feel the full spectrum of life without needing to filter it. That's where your power lies, not in how much you can escape, but in how much you can hold, how deeply you can feel, how truthfully you can respond. When you stop drinking, not for rules, not for image, but for alignment, you begin to hear again. The voice you forgot you had, the knowing that never left, only got quieter. You feel your emotions without drowning in them. You access inspiration without needing to be altered. And slowly, the gap between who you are and who you pretended to be begins to close. You reclaim your energy, not in a flash, but breath by breath, choice by choice. until the cravings stop feeling like commands, until joy feels possible without enhancement, until clarity becomes more comfortable than chaos. That's not deprivation, that's restoration. That's what comes when you finally decide to return to yourself. You don't need to look far to find the warnings. They've always been there, woven into every lineage that has ever taken consciousness seriously. The old texts didn't simply advise moderation, they begged for vigilance, not because they were puritanical or controlling, but because they understood what was at stake. Not just your health, not just your safety, but your connection to the divine thread running through all things. That thread must be held with clarity, and clarity dissolves the moment you trade presence for intoxication. In the Vedic tradition, clarity is the ground of truth. Sattva, the quality of light, purity, and balance, is seen as the foundation for all spiritual growth. It brings peace to the mind, ease to the body, alignment to the soul. But alcohol, it belongs to tamas, the opposite, the heavy, the stagnant, the chaotic. It dulls the senses, clouds the perception, pulls you into inertia while convincing you that you're soaring. But there is no light in sedation, only shadow pretending to be rest. In Buddhism, the precepts are not rigid commandments, but keys to awareness. And among them, the refusal of intoxicants is central, not because they're inherently bad, but because their presence distorts mindfulness. You can't walk the middle path if your senses are veiled. You can't cultivate right action when your discernment is dulled. Buddha didn't speak of alcohol to scold the body. He spoke of it to protect the mind, because the mind is the gateway. Keep it clear, and the soul follows. Taoism teaches that harmony with the Tao, the natural flow of the universe, arises from internal stillness, from balance, but alcohol throws you into extremes. One moment high, another low, one moment expansive, then contracted. It shakes your rhythm, disrupts your signal, leaves you moving against the current. And when you move against the Tao, nothing fits. Life becomes friction. Joy turns to effort. Wisdom becomes inaccessible. And all of it feels normal, because you forgot what flow felt like to begin with. Even in Christianity, the mystics who looked beyond literal interpretations spoke of the necessity of spiritual sobriety, to stay awake, to remain watchful. Be alert, they said. Guard your heart, not in fear, but in reverence, because the soul, they knew, is easily seduced by illusions dressed as comfort. Drunkenness, as they saw it, was not just about excess, it was about abandonment, not celebration, but escape. And escape, no matter how pleasurable, always has a cost. Islam is even more explicit. Alcohol is not just discouraged, it is forbidden, and not out of dogma, but out of deep concern for what it does to the soul. The Quran refers to it as both sin and benefit, but says its harm far outweighs any good. In Sufi mysticism, where love of the divine is everything, the heart is seen as a sacred chalice. You do not pollute the chalice. You do not fill it with that which disorients the senses and erodes the remembrance of God. You keep it clear so that divine light can reflect fully. These traditions didn't all agree on everything, but on this they were unified. Intoxication weakens the signal, weakens the spirit, makes you easier to sway, harder to guide. And in a world that profits from your confusion, that is the most dangerous thing of all. Because when your energy field is disrupted, you are not just disconnected. You become open, wide open, to influences that don't come from within. Thought patterns you can't explain, emotions that flood you for no reason, a gnawing anxiety that doesn't feel like yours. These aren't random. They are signals that your field is carrying what doesn't belong to you. And sometimes, What enters through those cracks isn't just ambient energy. It's more focused, older, more persistent. The mystics of old spoke of astral beings, not in horror story tones, but in calm awareness. Forces that feed on disconnection, parasites of the spirit. They don't care if you believe in them. They only need you to forget your light, and when you drink, when you open the door, when your aura becomes thin and permeable, that forgetting begins. They attach not through violence, but through familiarity. They embed themselves in your cravings, in your patterns. They tell you to pour another, that you deserve it, that you're boring without it, that life is better this way. That voice, it's not always yours, but it sounds like yours. That's the trick. They mimic your thoughts until you can't tell the difference. You think you're choosing, but you're responding to programming, to suggestion, to energetic nudges that entered when your shield was down. And every time you choose the drink again, you reaffirm their place, not out of weakness, but out of repetition, out of exhaustion, out of the belief that this is just who you are. But that belief is the prison. That belief is the disconnect. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are not incapable of presence. You've simply been numbed long enough to forget your native state, your natural resonance, your true capacity. And when you begin to peel back the layers of sedation, slowly, gently you remember. Your clarity comes back like a sunrise, not all at once, but moment by moment, thought by thought. Your intuition grows louder, your mind sharper. Your body begins to trust itself again. You begin to notice things you used to miss. The way your breath deepens when you're still. The way your heart speaks when you're quiet. The way the world feels different when you're truly here. You laugh differently, not because you're tipsy, but because you're open. You connect more deeply, not because the walls are down, but because the heart is up. You express without needing to exaggerate. You feel without needing to escape. And what was once muted by intoxication now becomes your teacher. Your discomfort, your sorrow, your anger, they all begin to guide you. Not because they disappear, but because you no longer fear them. You stop pushing them away. You start listening. And in the listening, something begins to shift. Your vibration rises. Your field, once fragmented, begins to heal. Like a cracked window slowly smoothing itself, your aura mends. The holes close. The interference dissipates. What once clung to your energy falls away. What once whispered to your impulses grows silent, because it has no place anymore. You are no longer compatible with distortion. You are no longer food for the fragmented. You become whole, and wholeness repels what was born of lack. You start feeling sacred again, not in a religious sense, but in the way you hold yourself, the way you make choices, the way you say no, not out of fear, but out of resonance. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You just feel it. You feel the pull toward clarity, and you honor it. That is power. That is what they never wanted you to discover. Because a person who returns to themselves is a threat to every system built on dependence. You don't need as much. You don't consume as much. You don't follow blindly. You don't buy into the lie that your joy comes from outside. You become sovereign, and sovereignty cannot be sold. So ask yourself, who benefits when you stay foggy? Who profits when you silence your truth with a glass? Who remains in control when you forget your own? The moment you ask that, you wake up, and waking up is dangerous. To the narrative, to the industry, to the structures that count on your spiritual sedation, but it's liberation for you. Because you were never meant to live muted. You were never meant to stumble through life disconnected from your own divine intelligence. You were meant to feel it all, to be fully alive with no buffer. That aliveness may hurt sometimes, but it's real. And in that realness is the medicine you've been seeking in the bottom of every bottle. And it was never there. The bottle offered sedation, not healing. It offered escape, not peace. It mimicked transcendence. But true transcendence doesn't come from chemical manipulation. It comes from integration, from facing the very parts of yourself that alcohol teaches you to bypass. And you are ready for that, whether you know it yet or not. Healing doesn't begin with a single decision. It begins the moment you stop running, the moment you sit still long enough to feel the discomfort you've spent so long trying to outdrink. It begins not when you swear off substances out of punishment, but when you choose to remember who you were before the forgetting, because that memory is not lost. It's waiting. Like embers under ash, it glows faintly, ready to be fanned back into flame the moment you return your breath to it. The first step is presence. Not the kind of presence that looks perfect in a picture or impresses at a retreat, but the kind that hurts at first, the kind that trembles, the kind that makes your throat tighten and your chest ache because the things you've pushed away for years are no longer muffled. They rise, they speak, they want to be witnessed, not sedated, and for the first time, you let them. That trembling is not weakness, it's resurrection. It's the reawakening of the nervous system you dulled for so long, just to keep moving through a life that never gave you time to breathe. Your nervous system has memory. It knows the stories you tried to forget. It carries the fragments you never processed. And when you stop numbing, it begins the delicate task of bringing those fragments home. It may feel like anxiety, like restlessness, like a body on edge. But what you're feeling is energy reintegrating. You're not breaking, you're rebooting. And the reboot isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or revelation. It comes in quiet moments of choosing not to flee, of breathing through the urge to numb, of saying, "I see you," to the sadness instead of drowning it in synthetic joy. There is a sacred intelligence in your system. When you give it permission to do what it was always designed to do, it begins to regulate, slowly, gently, like a forest regrowing after fire. Your inner terrain begins to shift. Breath work helps, not as a trendy hack, but as a return to rhythm. You begin to learn that the breath was always your anchor, that the very thing you forgot how to trust is the thing that never left you. Each inhale tells your body, "I'm safe now." Each exhale whispers, "We're not escaping anymore." And the more consistently you return to your breath, the more your energy field recalibrates. The chaos doesn't vanish, but your ability to hold it changes. You grow capacity, not just mentally, but spiritually. You become a container for your own healing, rather than a sieve leaking energy into every craving. And healing your field isn't a concept, it's a reality. The energy around you is not an idea. It's a living expression of your current state, and after years of erosion, it needs repair. You begin with intention, real, focused intention. Because your field listens to direction. It follows your will. When you say, "I am ready to restore," your field responds, but words are not enough. Action grounds intention. So you begin to move differently. Maybe you meditate, not to escape, but to enter. You sit, even if it's just for a few minutes, and you let the stillness be awkward. Let it be noisy. Let it be whatever it is. Because underneath all the noise is the truth that's been waiting. Maybe you turn to energy work, Reiki, sound baths, subtle therapies that don't just soothe the body but cleanse the aura. And what once felt unmeasurable begins to feel real. The fog lifts, the heaviness lightens, the tightness in your chest softens, you sleep deeper, wake clearer. You begin to notice the difference between what is yours and what you've been carrying for others. The boundaries return, not as walls but as membranes. You become able to feel deeply without drowning in it. You start discerning not just who belongs in your space, but what belongs in your field. And the more you clear, the more you remember what alignment feels like. Yoga becomes a friend, not just the poses, but the breath, the attention, the integration of movement with spirit. You begin to rebuild the relationship between you and your body, a relationship that for years may have been shaped by avoidance or control. Now you move with care, with listening, with respect. The body stops being a battleground and becomes a sacred place again. And then there's nature, the original frequency keeper. Few things restore the human field faster than the earth. The trees don't rush you, the water doesn't judge, the wind doesn't demand you explain yourself. You walk into the forest or along the shore, and the natural order rearranges your system without asking anything of you. You breathe with the rhythm of something older than trauma, and in that breath, your own rhythm returns. The more time you spend in natural frequencies, the more your own begins to re-emerge. You feel the hum again, that subtle awareness that you are in fact whole, that the fragments were never lost, just scattered, and now piece by piece they return. You may cry, not because you're broken, but because the remembering hurts, because beneath the surface of every high you chased was a pain that never got to speak. And now finally it's safe. You don't resist it, you welcome it. And in that welcome, the healing deepens. You start letting go of the lies, that you need to be fixed, that you're better altered, that your light is too much, too little, too wild. You realize that those stories were never yours. They were placed there, and you carried them until your back bent from the weight. But now, you set them down, one by one. No ceremony needed, just presence, just breathe. You begin creating from a different place, not from the hunger to be seen, but from the clarity of having nothing to prove. Your creativity stops being performance and becomes expression. Your words feel truer. Your movements feel freer. Your voice shakes less and rings more. The authenticity you used to borrow from the bottle now flows from your center. You laugh more, but differently. It's not the laughter that chases the void. It's the laughter that rises from joy without condition, that says, I am here, I am enough, I am alive. And in that simple declaration you find freedom, not the freedom you were sold, the one with neon lights and loud music and blurred nights, but the quiet freedom of knowing that nothing owns you, that your peace is not for rent, that your soul no longer answers to something outside itself. You begin to notice people differently. You see who respects your clarity and who misses your chaos. You see who loved you for your presence and who only connected with your performance. And you stop chasing the latter. You stop apologizing for your alignment. You no longer need to shrink to make others comfortable. Some drift away, some get louder, but others rise with you. You begin attracting different conversations, different rhythms, people who speak in real tones, who sit in silence without flinching, who don't need alcohol to say what they mean. And those connections, they nourish you in ways intoxication never could. And one day, without trying, you realize something powerful. You no longer crave the drink. not because you forced yourself to resist, but because it no longer matches your frequency. You've outgrown it. Like an old shell, it served a purpose once, but now it constrains, it dims, it belongs to a version of you that needed escape, and that version has been met, loved, integrated. You don't reject alcohol from superiority. You simply recognize it for what it is, a tool, one that served once but is no longer required. Your joy doesn't need coaxing anymore. Your truth doesn't need a translator. Your power doesn't need to be unlocked by anything other than your own breath. And maybe most miraculously of all, you remember everything. The moments, the insights, the emotions, the sacred quiet. They stay with you. You don't have to chase them. You don't forget the night before. You don't wake with fog and regret. You wake clear, present, alive. This isn't just sobriety, this is sovereignty. The return of your energy to its rightful place, the restoration of your inner temple, the sacred homecoming of a soul that wandered too long in the wilderness of sedation. And now it has found its way back. You begin to realize the world doesn't know what to do with a person who's clear. It's designed for the distracted, the numbed, the slightly off-center. It sells you comfort disguised as chaos and celebration hollowed out by sedation. When you step outside that system, not with defiance but with quiet refusal, you change the frequency of every space you enter. You become a disruption, not through rebellion, but through resonance. Your clarity makes people nervous, not because you're judging them, but because your presence reflects what they've forgotten in themselves. You don't need to say a word. Just by being fully in your body, fully aligned, fully here, you remind them of something ancient, something sacred, the part of them that longs to feel without a filter, that aches to belong without bargaining their essence. It's not that alcohol becomes your enemy, it just becomes irrelevant. You no longer see it as something to resist. You simply see it for what it is, a thing that offered comfort when you didn't know where else to look, a tool that numbed pain before you were strong enough to face it. You don't curse it, you don't worship it, you outgrow it, and in that outgrowing, you take your power back. The rituals you use to join no longer feel like celebration. The laughter around a table, the clinking of glasses, the haze of faux connection, they don't satisfy the way they once did. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you're finally in tune. You've tasted presence now. You know what it's like to sit in a room and feel everything and not want to run. You know how to celebrate without splitting from yourself. And that's what changes everything. You don't reject parties, you don't abandon joy, you just reimagine them. You gather with people who don't need to escape to be open. You have conversations that don't fade with the buzz. You dance with full control of your body and full surrender of your soul. Not because you're high, but because you're free. Truly free. The kind of freedom that doesn't dissolve when the sun comes up. There's a softness that returns, a gentleness in your system that you forgot existed. You touch the world differently. You speak slower. You listen deeper. You hold space for others, not because you've been taught to, but because you finally have the capacity. You're not preoccupied with managing your own disconnection anymore, so you can witness theirs with compassion. And sometimes your presence alone becomes a mirror they didn't know they needed. You begin to remember why you came here, not to numb the pain, but to transmute it, not to chase pleasure, but to live from alignment. You start to see the story of alcohol for what it was, not just a personal habit, but a cultural spell, a collective agreement that disconnection was normal, that sedation was harmless, that to be part of it all meant to abandon your truth for a sip of false belonging. But when you step outside that story, a new one begins. You become the living proof that another way is possible, that joy doesn't need to be borrowed, that presence doesn't need to be filtered, that connection can be raw, unguarded, fully felt. You walk into spaces where the old version of you would have craved a drink, and you don't reach for anything. You just breathe, you feel, and you realize this is what I was always searching for. It was never the alcohol, it was the permission to feel at ease, to let go, to belong. But now you give yourself that permission without needing a substance to mediate it. You walk in your own skin like it's sacred again, like it's enough. Like the edges of your being don't need to be blurred to be lovable. And here's the part no one tells you. The more you live this way, the more radiant you become. Not the kind of radiance that comes from performance, but the kind that comes from coherence, from every layer of you vibrating in harmony, mind and body and soul speaking the same language. That resonance is magnetic. It draws in what's meant for you, people, opportunities, insights. It repels what drains you, not through force, but through mismatch. You stop attracting chaos. You stop calling in confusion, because your field is clear now, and clear fields don't entertain distortion. You begin to trust yourself in ways you never could before, not just in decisions, but in sensations. You believe what your body tells you. You listen when your spirit whispers. You move when your intuition nudges. There's no longer a delay between knowing and doing. The static is gone. The signal is strong. You are finally fully tuned in. And as you move through the world in this state, something remarkable happens. Others start waking up too. They feel your frequency and remember their own. They ask questions they never dared to before. They challenge the rituals they've followed without thinking. They sit with their own discomfort, just to see what's beneath it. And the collective begins to shift, not because of a revolution, but because of presence. You weren't meant to change the world by force. You were meant to embody what the world forgot. And when you do, you become a quiet revolution. Not loud, not righteous, just real. And reality is contagious in a world built on illusion. So you keep choosing presence, day after day, even when it's hard, even when the noise gets loud again. You don't expect perfection, you expect practice. You give yourself grace, you learn to recognize the subtle signs of drift. You feel when you're slipping into old stories, and instead of judging yourself, you come back. You breathe, you ground, you remember. Because you know now, clarity isn't a destination, it's a devotion, a moment-to-moment commitment to stay with yourself no matter what arises. And in that commitment, life becomes less about control and more about communion, less about performance and more about embodiment. You don't need to convince anyone of anything, you just live the proof. And those who are ready will find you, not because you're pushing, but because you're resonating. And resonance is the most powerful teacher of all. The old you, the one who reached for the drink to feel brave, to feel whole, to feel something, is not gone. They're integrated, honored. They showed you what needed to be healed. And now they've stepped aside to let your true self emerge, not the curated version, not the altered one, the whole one, the clear one, the deeply awake, fiercely tender, completely sovereign self you were always meant to be. And that self doesn't need a drink to be powerful. That self doesn't need sedation to feel safe. That self is the key you've been looking for, the home you've been aching to return to, the love you thought lived in a bottle, but actually lived inside you the whole time. So here you are, fully here, fully alive, fully home. And from this place, anything is possible.